Right. The Lord is good. Stronghold in the day of trouble. He knows them that trust in him. The Lord is great and greatly to be praised. He is to be feared above all gods. The Lord is perfect. The Lord is one God, not three gods. The Lord is one God. And the first commandment is to have no other gods before him. Worship him in spirit and in truth, through the blood of the everlasting covenant. The only wise God, the only true God. Jesus said, salvation is of the Jews. Salvation is of the God of the Jews, not the God of any other people. Only one God, and that God is the God of the Jews. Through the blood of the everlasting covenant. So here we are at part 5 on the false doctrine of Paul in Romans. Starting at Romans 4:13 and 15. It says, for the promise that he should be the heir of the world, talking about Abraham, was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law, false, but through the righteousness of faith. So I'm going to show you where it's totally false, why this is totally false. I have some verses from Genesis that will prove it to be total phony baloney. It's like a new religion. Paul, some people have said that he invented Christianity. Well, he invented false Christianity, yeah. He was the first corrupter of the Bible. And the Christianity which he invented, for the most part, is a false Christianity. It's really like a new God, a new religion. It's not even the same God as the Old Testament. And that's most of the time, because you can find verses that he wrote. Unfortunately, the bulk of the New Testament, of the epistles, is from this man named Paul, otherwise known as Saul. He was like two people. He was double-minded. He said one thing, and then he contradicted himself. He kept doing that over and over and over. But the majority of what he said was false in that so he did say some true things. But the majority of what he said was false, I believe. His essence, the true doctrine of what he had, his bottom line base doctrine, was totally corrupt and totally non-true. It was unbiblical. It was totally against the Old Testament, against what Jesus said, against the book of Revelation, and on and on and on. Going on at verse 14. For if they which are of the law be heirs, so now he's trying to prove his point, faith is made void. Not true. And the promise made of none effect. But then he says, because the law works wrath, wrong, totally wrong. For where no law is, there is no transgression. Totally not true. He kept saying that. I don't know why. It's nonsensical. A lot of things he was saying are nonsensical. People have tried to make sense of what he was saying, and then it ends up being that a lot of different people say a lot of different things, trying to make sense out of it, in the different versions. So, first of all, where it says that the promise of Abraham was not through the law, but through the righteousness of faith, which he just seemed to come up with this. I'm going to show you where that is just not true. The promise of Abraham was through the commandment of God, through the covenant he had with God. He had a covenant. God said, I'm going to make a covenant with you. In other words, I want you to do certain things. And then if you do what I command, what I say, then I will do what I have said for you. Then I will do certain things. If you do certain things, I will do certain things. That is what a covenant is. A covenant, we have the old covenant and the new covenant. A covenant is an agreement. It's a contract. This is a written contract. It's all in writing. And so I'm going to go back to this probably, but let me read Genesis and show you what I mean. And when Abraham, okay, it's Genesis 17, 1 and 2, and then it's all in 17. There's a bunch of verses here. And when Abraham was 90 years old, actually 90 years old and 9. They can't just say 99, the King James, right? So when he was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abraham, well, Abram at the time, and said to him, I am the Almighty God. Walk before me and be perfect. So right away, there's a commandment to him. Right away, God has set down a law. And the law was to walk before him and be perfect. That was his command to Abraham. Be perfect. So this promise that he's going to give is based on him being perfect. Of course, we have to know what that means. It doesn't mean that he's going to be equal with God, but he's just going to do what God said. That's what that means. When it says be perfect, you do what God said to the best of your ability. Then he says, I will make my covenant between me and you and will multiply you exceedingly. So if he would do what God said, then he was going to multiply him exceedingly. He was going to have an unlimited amount of descendants. Then we look at verse 7. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you in their generations for an everlasting covenant to be a God to you and to your seed after you. So see that it's all predicated and based on the covenant. In other words, Abraham had to do what he said, and then if he did what he said, be perfect, and that's not all, there's more detail. Then he was going to multiply his seed a lot. And we have verse 9. And God said to Abraham, you shall keep my covenant. See? Therefore, you shall keep my covenant, therefore, you and your seed after you in their generations. So it was based on not only him keeping the commandments and the covenant, but his seed after him, that came after him. This is my covenant, verse 10, which ye shall keep, because me and you and your seed after you, between me and you and your seed after you. So I'm trying to read this in, modern English, and that's why I missed a word there. I don't like reading it in the old language, although it would work, but I don't like it. I'm going to read it again. This is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and you and your seed after you. Every man child among you shall be circumcised. It was a covenant of circumcision that he gave to Abraham. That was what it was based on. This is not just what I'm saying, but what God said, that this blessing that he was going to get was based on him keeping the covenant of circumcision. And then he says in verse 11, you shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of the covenant between me and you. See, if I use other versions, there's always something about the other versions that I don't like. Something about them. Sometimes that's good, but other times something irks me. And so that's why I stay with the King James, even though the King James has its own problems. All right, so we clearly see that it's because of the commandments being obeyed that the righteousness or the blessing of God would be upon Abraham. We go back to where it said that in Romans, and he's claiming the opposite. He's claiming it was not through the law. Everything that God commands is a law. When you say the law of God, which he never did, he just said the law, and he said, what do you mean the law? He means the law of God. What else could he mean? Everything God commands is the law. And so we see that it was he was going to be heir of the world through the law. But Paul is saying here that's not through the law. For if they which are of the law be heirs, so now he's trying to prove his lie, faith is made void, is nonsense, and the promise made of none effect, hogwash. Because the law works wrath. Well, no, that is totally the opposite of the truth. The law works obedience. The law works blessing. If you keep the law of God, the laws of God, then you get favor, you get blessing, you get grace, you get the help of God. You don't get wrath. This is a total lie, total fabrication, total falsehood. And once again, where there is no law, it says there is no transgression. Well, what about, there's all kinds of cases where before the law, well, you see, now we find out that the law began from the beginning. You could even maybe go back to Adam and say, that the law began then. But the law of Moses, if we consider it the law of Moses, then it came before the law of Moses. There's always been law. There's always been transgression. So that segues perfectly into the next verse I want to look at, Romans 5:13. and I have a bunch of other versions, a few others, which is just what I was saying. For until the law, this is a false statement, keep in mind. For until the law, sin was in the world. See, he's thinking that the law started when Moses came. But no, the law started basically the beginning of time, beginning of man, the creation of man, the law started. And then he says, but sin is not imputed where there is no law. And that's false, totally false. Because we find out that there's always been a law. But if we just assume that say that Moses was the one who brought us the law, which a lot of people would say, then that's still false, because we see, Sodom and Gomorrah was torched, was incinerated. It wasn't just Sodom and Gomorrah, there was other cities too. There was a bunch of cities that God torched. He totally incinerated them. And people have gone back to the sites that they believe where these places were, and they've found evidence of extreme heat. There's a material, sulfur, I think it is, that can only be caused by some kind of extreme heat. So he's claiming there was a time when there was no law, which is, not true. And then he's saying that sin was not imputed. But I want to stay with that one verse for some reason, and I want to look at these other three versions. They're basically saying the same thing, so you can't say, well, the King James says it one way and the other Bibles say it right. No. This Bible in basic English says, because till the law came, sin was in existence. They're just echoing the same thing. But sin is not put to the account of anyone when there is no law to be broken. Yeah, well, that's nonsense. The CEV, sin was in the world before the law came. So it is being assumed here that somehow the law came with Moses, which we've already just learned now that that's not true. But then he says, but no record of sin was kept. Oh, it was always kept. God always keeps a record of sin. And there's many other cases of God judging people before Moses. Oh, tons of them. There's many different cases. Well, he judged the whole world. Think about it. The flood, he killed everybody in the world. He judged the world as being corrupt and evil, and he destroyed the whole world. So that's how totally false these statements are. The Darby, for until law, sin was in the world. But sin is not put to account when there is no law. Not true. So then it goes on, the very next verse, and then he's contradicting himself. This is what he does. This is what he did, and that's these writings. This is what these writings do, wherever they came from. Verse 14, the very next verse. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses. So he's contradicting himself. Because if he says that there's no transgression if there's no law, but then he's saying death reigned. Well, if there's death, then transgression was reigning. But then it says, which I find to be fascinating, even over them that had not sinned after the similitude of Adam's transgression, who is the figure of him that was to come. I think that statement is just nonsense. It really and truly is. Let me read some of these other versions, and I think they actually help my argument, or they help my point. The NIV, nevertheless, death reigned from the time of Adam to the time of Moses, even over those who did not sin by breaking a command. What? As did Adam. Of course they did. What's the difference? Plus, Adam is totally unique. Nobody really understands the simple truth about Adam. Adam didn't know the difference between good and evil. It was inevitable that he and his wife were going to do what they did. They didn't know anything. But of course, it says death reigned. Of course, death reigned because of breaking a command. It says that they did not break a command. Of course they did. He destroyed the whole world by the flood. I just think it's fascinating because it says, as did Adam. Nonsense. It says, who is a pattern of the one to come? Why is he a pattern? Why is Adam a pattern of the one to come? He's not. I got a definition of pattern. Something that repeats in a predictable way is a pattern. All right? So he's trying to say that, now, who's he assuming when he's saying the one to come? We're talking about Jesus, supposedly, right? Or anybody, for that matter. So he's claiming that somehow Adam repeated in a predictable way. What kind of talk is this? You know, that's doesn't make any sense. You can't really try to figure out a lot of these statements because they don't make any sense. How are you going to make sense out of a statement that's nonsensical, illogical, irrational? It doesn't make any sense. You know, this makes no sense that he's saying that Adam is a pattern of the one to come. That's not true. That's not true. The CEV says, yet death still had power over all who lived from the time of Adam to the time of Moses. No kidding. This happened, though not everyone disobeyed a direct command from God. Of course they did. Many people did. It says not everyone disobeyed. Well, not every single person if they were totally naive. But, you know, this is a silly statement. This happened, though not everyone disobeyed a direct command from God as Adam did. Well, they're trying to say that Adam had a direct command from God and that all these people that died in the time of between Adam and Moses did not have direct commands from God. I don't believe that. I believe many people did. Everybody supposedly has the spiritual command. It's in the air. It's and there's always representatives commanding the word of God. And then God speaks to people. He tests people. He commands people. And then this version here says, in some ways, Adam is like Christ who came later. Oh, was that right? In what way is that? The GW, yet death ruled from the time of Adam to the time of Moses, even over those who did not sin in the same way Adam did when he disobeyed. Well, we know that's not true. Adam is an image of the one who would come. No, why is he an image of the one who should come? He was created from dust. Now, there's no way that you can just say that. I mean, there's certain things that are true about Adam, and that's he did certain things, and then we have Christ, who was who he was. And lastly, nevertheless, this is the ISV. Nevertheless, death ruled from the time of Adam to Moses. even over those who did not sin in the same way Adam did when he disobeyed. He is a foreshadowing of the one who would come. No, I don't see that. No, that there's no rational explanation to that. So this, once again, that's nonsensical. No, but it's all this foreshadowing, talk of foreshadowing and images, and so it's all been made up, really. I mean, Adam sinned, and he became like God, that he knew good from evil. We don't even have much information about Adam, but then we have information about how the world became corrupt. We have information about the descendants of Adam, and then eventually the world became corrupt. I mean, Adam lived 1,000 years. What kind of, that's, to me, that's life. You know, that he lived a lot longer than people live now. Adam, Jesus was nothing like Adam. Jesus was immortal. He was a pre-existent God. He was a pre-existent being, birthed from God, who incarnated into the world. And he was born of a woman. Well, he came into the body of a woman. Well, God prepared a body for him that was of the seed of Abraham and of his own seed, of God's seed. And then his pre-existent son inhabited that body. That's nothing like Adam. I don't know why he's trying to say Adam was some kind of a similar situation. I mean, there's no similarities at all, really. Jesus was the eternal sacrifice, Lamb of God. He ended all the offering, all the animal sacrifices. He ended it all. He was the perfect sacrifice once for all.